I remember one day when I finally figured something out, all thanks to technology. I started doing some research on bipolar disorder, and I realized that it wasn't possible for me to have something because I already exhibited some of the signs. Sometimes everything was fine, and then suddenly everything would go south. It was like the person was always trying to start a fight or create confusion. I don't know why, but he never left. He never slept outside, he never left me alone, and he never went out. I remember one day when I finally figured something out, and it was all thanks to technology. I started doing some research on bipolar disorder and I said, no way. I've already had some of these symptoms, and it's not normal. Sometimes everything was great, and then suddenly everything would just go south. It was like he was always trying to start a fight or get me confused. I don't know why, but he never went out. He never slept outside, he never left me alone, and he never went out. A night it was EMC, but that didn't happen for a while. It was just in the beginning of our marriage. Then he was always together. We opened a store in our neighborhood and we worked together there. I was always with him and I liked spending time with people. Then I realized that the little things mattered. I went to the bank. I solved something. I went to the bakery and bought a loaf of bread. At night it was EMC. But that didn't happen right at the start of our marriage. There was a period when we were not together. Then we opened a store in our neighborhood and worked there together. I was always with him and we had similar schedules. I would go to the bank and we would buy bread from the market. These were the most common times for betrayals. It was during these times that I couldn't imagine how many times I worked really early because I needed to go out to solve something. Sometimes I went to the store to facilitate because he had total control over where I was and what I was doing. He also made it impossible for me to go out. Back then, the most common schedules were for betrayals. I couldn't imagine these times, and how many times I worked to get to the store early because I needed to solve things on the street. Sometimes I went to the store to facilitate because he had total control over where I was, what I was doing, and that I couldn't go out to find out what they were doing. In some of these moments, my house was even used as a meeting point because I live on a dead end and I'm working there. My children were at school, or already adults or working, and he used this safety to accentuate each time, plus the betrayal. My name is Fernanda and I am 41 years old. Today, I got married at 19. I met my husband at 19. I'm Fernanda, 41, and today I got married. I met my ex-husband when I was 17, but we didn't start dating until 19. We had friends in common, and he was a youth leader at a church with very strict rules. I was living in a very distant neighborhood at the time, and I met people I really admired. He was the youth leader of a church with a much more rigid doctrine than my own. I was a Baptist and he was a Jehovah's Witness. We were both 17 when we started dating and we had friends in common from church. I moved to a really different neighborhood and I met people I really admired. He was the youth leader of a church with very strict rules while I was a Baptist. He was a member of the Jehovah's Witnesses and he was 20. It was a long time ago and it was complicated. I really admired the way he acted and spoke. We became very close friends. I had a previous relationship that was not very healthy, and then, at 19 I ended that relationship. I met him and I found myself alone again. He was surprised when he learned about my previous relationship. We had a meeting of young people and he was impressed. So many years ago, I was in a complicated situation. I admired him for his acting and his way of speaking. It was a lot of friendship, very much unfolded and developed. I had a previous relationship that was not very good, but it was normal. Then at 19, I finished a previous relationship. I met him and I found myself alone without having a relationship. He was surprised when he learned of this news and that we met. We promoted ourselves in a certain way, and he promoted this meeting and asked me to date. I didn't want to do it very fast because I had just left a long relationship, but I accepted because I already admired him. For 2 years I had looked at him and thought, right? At the time, he also asked God every time I passed his house. He spoke to God, saying, God, if you want, I want. So it was 2 years there. We admired each other in silence, and that was all. We were on the same page right from the start. He asked me on a date, and I was a bit hesitant because I had just ended a long relationship. But I said yes because I really admired him. For 2 years he had been asking God to let him be with me. He said, if you want, I want. So we dated for 2 years in silence. I thought he was a great guy, and I knew I'd be happy with him. Then we got together and it was all very fast. In just 6 months, we had our first son and got married. My family was a bit scared at first, but he was very articulate. My father and my mother liked him, and he was able to captivate people right away. He said that the person he was going to marry had to be a great woman and would be happy because he really admired her. Right then, when we started dating, it was all very fast. The period between when we started dating and when we got married, plus when we got married, was 6 months. My family was also scared at first, but he was very articulate. My father and my mother liked him right away, and he was able to captivate people. The family quickly fell in love. He got married and we got married officially. It was the start of our normal married life, but we didn't have much time together because we were very young. I was 23 years old and I was already pregnant with our son. We were going to understand each other over time. I was adapting to the way he was and it was normal. I couldn't realize some signs that we fell in love quickly and then we got married. It was the start of our normal married life, but we didn't have much time to get to know each other because we were very young. I was 23 and I was pregnant with our son. It took a while to understand each other, but I realized that there were some signs that something wasn't right. After a lot of time, research, and with the help of technology, you can identify and remember things. Wow, that was already a sign. The word abuse didn't seem to exist a few years ago. There was no word for narcissist or toxic relationships. These words are new, and they didn't exist in the form they have now. After a lot of time understanding some things, researching, and with the technological resources available to us today, we're able to identify and remember things. Wow, that was already a sign. That word didn't seem to exist a few years ago. There was no such thing as a narcissist or a toxic relationship. These words are new, right? They didn't exist in the same form, and there was no technology. We had our second son a few years later, and we came to a place where we had been married for more or less a year. I discovered the first betrayal, and he changed his behavior. He started drinking gradually, which was something he didn't do. He didn't keep in the church as soon as we got married, and then some others started having problems. I recognized that my father had a very strong temperament. He was very difficult. We had our second son a year later, and I felt like something was off, but I didn't know exactly what. I started noticing some changes in my husband's behavior, like drinking more than he used to. He also started acting more distant from the church. When we got married, I noticed some problems with my father-in-law, who had a very strong temper. I didn't understand how these changes fit with the love we shared as a family. I had a hard time accepting that my father-in-law, who had 2 children and a lot of freedom, didn't fit in with my family. I had a hard time understanding how people who have been married for a long time didn't fit in with my family. I hope you'll support and listen to older people who have a different experience with the church. I never had to be married, but I had some limiting beliefs about God. I had this belief that God's family was really me. I even thought that God had the power to do the impossible, like perform miracles. But it was also tough to understand free will. I thought that God changed those who wanted to be changed. I had a hard time understanding this. I was very supportive, but it was hard to keep up. I felt like I was lost in a war. And I knew something was off, but I didn't know exactly what. He really has me wrapped around his little finger. I even believe that God has the power to do the impossible, like miracles. But it was also difficult to understand free will. He changes the one who wants to be changed. He enters, in fact, to do with those who want to be changed. I had difficulty understanding this, so I was supportive but often lost in the middle of a lost war. I didn't know exactly what was wrong, but I knew something was off. And 20 years have passed. Next, there are 20 years of marriage and several crises, right? Adultery, right? I discovered it from him every time. When you discover one, you confess the others. There is a lot that I didn't know, and you will change it. When you get older, you will calm down, improve, and mature. And time went by, and things were just pie. I was always very passive. I was never a fight to discuss. Over the past 20 years, we've weathered a few storms, including an affair on his part. I found out about it, and he confessed every time. There were so many things I didn't know, and I'm sure you'll learn more as you get older. You'll become more calm, mature, and you'll find your own way. I was always very passive. I never fought to discuss things and I never set boundaries. I went through the entire cycle of a narcissist. It's a cycle of isolating yourself from family and friends and only focusing on your own problems. It was frustrating for him when I ran away from home. I had to be very careful, and I remember that we lived in a new neighborhood, so we didn't have much yet. I had to put limits on myself, but I went through the whole cycle. It's a cycle of isolation, where you're detached from yourself and your loved ones. It's a cycle of counting your problems, and it really bothered him when I'd run away from home. I had to be super careful all the time, like walking on eggshells. I remember that people lived in a new neighborhood, so they didn't have much yet. They were still getting used to the city and the jealousy. He was so big that he worked in a telephone network that was one of the devices we had at home. He monitored when someone prayed or didn't have the famous cross line. You realize that there was someone else listening to us in our yard before the balcony was sandblasted. I remember how many times he passed that little girl that land broom on the side of the house when he was going to work, because I am so grateful for the lessons I've learned about urbanization and the complexities of human behavior. It's incredible how he was so dedicated to his work in the telephone network, which was a device we had at home. He would monitor to make sure everyone was praying the right way, and I remember feeling a sense of responsibility for the safety of our home. I remember how many times he passed by the Aninha right outside the house, and how he would check for footprints on the land broom to see if anyone had entered or if I had left. It was a way of ensuring our safety, and it made me feel like he was always watching over us. I also had a pediatrician who was a big help, and I'm grateful for the financial support I received. I always worked to support my family, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to contribute. He knew the brands of footprints there. If anyone had entered or if I had left, it was probably our one. I caught a ride with someone. It could have been my father, uncle, brother, or even my husband. I went to the pediatrician's office because I was determined to support myself. I always saw my responsibility as being linked to my beliefs about money. It wasn't the financial issue that stopped me from getting married. I always worked when my children were born. I had to take a break because my company didn't support me. There was no way to stay for more than a few years. He was the only one who provided for the household. After that, I returned to work, but I was in a difficult position. I didn't want to be a hostage to that period. I didn't even think about being a hostage because I like to produce. I had to take a break from work because of my job. I couldn't go on like that, so I decided to take a break. I couldn't see a way out of that situation. I felt like I was a hostage in my own home. I couldn't see a way out of that situation. I felt like I was trapped. I didn't want to be trapped. I didn't even think about being trapped because I like to produce. I like to contribute. I like to buy things. I like to do things. I was created like this. It was very difficult to be trapped at that time. It was a decision I made. People ended the marriage, but I can work. I can't see in this situation. I feel a little responsible because I had to pray. I'm a pretty easygoing person, but I had a tough time during my childhood and early adulthood. I was raised in a culture that was very focused on religion, and it made me feel like women were always to blame for everything. It was really hard for me to break free from that. I felt like I was always being judged for not praying enough, not getting involved with other people, and not being the perfect woman. I felt like I had something wrong with me, like maybe I was culturally influenced. Even the Bible says that your actions reflect on you. I totally get where you're coming from, Cartinia. When I was younger, my culture was really focused on gender roles and blame, and it really messed with my head. It made me feel like it was always the woman's fault, like if I hadn't done something, if I hadn't prayed enough, or if I hadn't gotten involved with someone else. It made me feel like my actions had to be culturally influenced, and that the Bible said my husband would convert if I behaved a certain way. I stuck with my faith for a long time, but it was really hard for me to see the truth. The greatest miracle in my life was leaving that relationship and surviving it. I left with my mind a little fragile, but still clear-headed. I've never had depression, but the last year was really tough. I flirted with depression and changed a lot over these 20 years. I became a more reserved person. My husband was a great guy, but he had a hard time with bipolar disorder. I stayed with him for a long time, but I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, the greatest miracle in my life was leaving that relationship. I left with my mind a little fragile, but still lucid. I had never been depressed, but the last year was a very big struggle. I flirted with depression and changed a lot during these 20 years. I became more reserved because if I spoke with someone about my problems, it somehow came to light. At the beginning, there was a carnival that he did right then. I had 2 people who accompanied me. They were fundamental to my process of divorce, and I still tried to stay in my relationship when I started doing therapy, which was one of the conditions that I put in place to try to stay in marriage. They make mistakes, do absurd things, and then promise to change. If I were to speak with someone about my problems and this somehow came to light, it would be a very difficult conversation. At the beginning, I had 2 people accompany me. They were very important in my process of divorce, and I still tried to stay in my relationship when I started doing therapy, which was one of the conditions that I put in place to try to stay in marriage. They make mistakes, do absurd things, and then promise to change, but only for a very short period. They get better, and then it seems to get worse. I have my conscience a lot quiet because I was not a woman Rose that was there. Lando, but everything is well now, and but one day you did not. I could put an end point in what and why I really had a very great faith that 1 hour was going to happen. Had a day that I solved thanks to technology. I solved the search for bipolarity, and it was a very short period, and they changed. They got better, and then it seemed to get worse. I have my conscience quiet a lot because I was not a woman Rose that was there. But everything is well now, and but one day you were not. I could put an end to what and why. I really had a very great faith that 1 hour was going to happen. Thanks to technology, I solved the search for bipolarity, and I spoke. If it is not possible to have anything because I already had some signs, it wasn't normal. Sometimes everything was well out of nowhere, and sometimes everything was bad. It seemed that the person really provoked a fight, a confusion. I don't know, but he wasn't going out. He never slept outside. He didn't leave me alone. He didn't go out at night. It was not so that it didn't happen. A period happened back there, but it was I said, if it's not possible to have anything, then I'll just go to the store. Sometimes everything was fine, and then suddenly it wasn't. It seemed like the person was always provoking a fight or creating confusion. I don't know why, but he never went out. He never slept outside, he didn't leave me alone, and he didn't go out at night. It wasn't that it didn't happen, it just happened during the initial phase of our marriage. Then it was always together, and we opened a store in our neighborhood. We started working together there, and then it was always together. I was working and I was there for the hours, how and so on. Then I realized that the most important things are, I go to the bank, I solve something, I go to the bakery, I buy a loaf of bread, I go to the market, and so on. So the most common hours for us were at these times. There were moments when he would suddenly stop talking to me, creating an atmosphere of tension, even though everything was actually great. At the beginning of our marriage, we were inseparable. We started working together at the same job in our neighborhood. We were always together, and I was very dependent on him. I realized that the little things mattered. I went to the bank. I went to the bakery to buy bread. I went to the market. These were the most common times for us to meet, and they were times that I couldn't imagine. How many times have I worked right? I need you to come to the store earlier. I need to solve this on the street. Most of the time I went to the store, and many times I went to the store to make it easier because he had total control over where I was and what I was doing. He made it impossible for me to go out and find out what he was doing. There were moments when I couldn't even imagine what was going on. I remember how many times I'd beg him to come to the store earlier, and how often I'd have to go out on the street to solve something. A lot of the time I'd go to the store to make things easier because he had total control over where I was and what I was doing. He even used my house as a meeting point because I live in a dead-end street, and my children were either at school or at work. He used this safety to increase the betrayals. The question of betrayal became the issue of abuse. He suddenly stopped talking to me and created situations to make the mood bad, even though everything was very good. These moments and even my house were used as a meeting point because I live in a dead-end street and I work there. My children are either at school or at home, and they are either already adults or working. He used this safety to accentuate each time more betrayals. The question of betrayal as the issue of abuse. He, from nowhere, stopped talking to me and created situations to make the mood bad, even though everything was very good. So, you will be there when I start the research of the bipolarity. I came to a theme narcissist. I started to identify myself, but I was still in a woman saving right of every cycle. I started to understand, to research if there is a way to solve that problem positively. Is what I could do to improve that? He has a cure. He has a way to look for in profile descriptions. It's a valve of escape to say it's not him. When I started learning about bipolar disorder, I realized that I had a lot in common with the narcissist. I started identifying with that aspect of myself, but I was still in the process of understanding and researching. I wanted to find a positive way to solve the problem, and I thought that maybe there was a way to improve the situation. I realized that I could look at profile descriptions as a way to express myself and find a way out. It's not that he didn't have 9 things out of 10, but he didn't have them either. It was very difficult for me to understand all of this. I think the therapies saved me somehow because he didn't. He started doing therapy in an attempt to help me calm down and keep the wedding going. He didn't continue, but I wanted to continue. I wanted to continue therapy even though we were individuals. About 8 months before he actually divorced me, I had a hard time understanding that he didn't want to be there for me. I thought the therapies were saving me somehow because he didn't. He started doing therapy to help me keep the wedding, to calm me down. He did not continue, and I wanted to continue. I wanted to continue therapy, but he didn't want to. We were each other's support system, but I wanted to continue therapy. About 8 months before actually divorcing me, I came to understand that I was a pest. I was very empathetic and I said, ours to mine. Empathy only disturbed me in this process because I had a lot of difficulty when I saw the other in suffering. I found that this was my weak point right when I saw another cry or the other ask the other. So I started learning to create a mechanism even to freeze me in that situation. I remember it was a year of complicated betrayals. I've been trying to understand, and I know that I found out that I'm a very empathetic person. I said, ours to mine, but empathy only disturbed me in this process because I had a lot of difficulty seeing the other person suffer. I found that this was my weak point, especially when I saw another person crying or asking for help. So, I started learning to create a mechanism to freeze me in that situation. I remember it was a complicated year where several betrayals occurred. I had an appointment with a psychiatrist and he said, watch. I'm not managing to sleep. I'm not getting Mark, my psychiatrist. I need to talk to someone I don't know. I took him to the psychiatrist and he said, I wanted you to enter me. I joined him at the consultation and said, this doctor asked that I come in to leave them at ease. He doesn't want to leave them alone. He asked if I could stay and I did. I had an appointment with the psychiatrist and he said, watch out. I'm not managing to sleep. I need to talk to someone. I don't know who, but I want to. So I took him to the psychiatrist and he said, I wanted you to enter me. I joined him at the consultation and said, this doctor asked that I come in to leave them at ease. I don't want to leave and I'm here. It was an absurd situation and I was making confessions. What I understand today is that what seemed to be a request for help was actually another session of torture. It was another way of torturing me. When the doctor asked him how many years of casework he had, he spoke like 20. He said, Doctor, I have a wonderful wedding. I don't have to complain about my saw, but I can't be without Try, my wife. I'm starting to see how things like this absurd living and so-called confessions might have been a way of asking for help. It seems like each time the doctor asked him how many years he had been married, he said 20. Then the doctor asked, since when do you practice it? He replied, as long as I can remember, from the first year of marriage. Then the doctor asked, how long have you been without him? Months, maybe a year, but usually it was a few months. I could have one of the relationships in my world, but he was collapsing. I remember the last thing I remember is that at the end of the consultation, the doctor turned to me and said, you said I'm. The doctor asked, when did you start practicing this? I replied, since the beginning of our marriage. The doctor asked, have you ever been separated from your husband? I replied, yes, for a few months, but usually it's been a year. The doctor asked, what was the reason for your separation? I replied I was struggling to maintain a relationship with him. I remember the last thing I remember is that at the end of the consultation, the doctor turned to me and said, you're doing well. You're taking care of yourself, but you're still adjusting to everything. I replied, if you need to go back to your medicine, please tell me. I'm still absorbing all of this. Soon after that, my divorce began in my mind. I had already decided to prepare myself, my finances, and my arguments. I replied, no, I never got that advice from a pastor. I have to be married. I'm doing my best to take care of myself, but I'm still processing all of this. If you need to go back to the doctor and you tell me I said it, I'll still absorb it. So from that moment on, my divorce started in my heart. He was already my intention right from the beginning. I prepared my mind, I created a financial reserve, and I prepared an argument. But I never said that today right here. No one, not even a pastor, told me. So you have to be married. I heard a lot of good things, but my beliefs, what I learned as a child, remained with me until adulthood. Then when someone says, you are a woman, you speak no, but you will improve, I felt it was true. So they were really my children. Back then, I decided to divorce when I really tried in every way to save this marriage. I wanted to look at it from a spiritual perspective. I wanted to look at it from a human perspective. I wanted to look at it from the perspective of someone who needs help. I had already understood that this was a defect. In fact, he was addicted to that adrenaline rush, right? Betrayal, omitting to hide some things, and confessing other things. I felt so bad after I brought you very bad things, so if he was not doing well, he started using this argument to move me. Some way he knew I was going to seek a way of help, and it was when I stopped that one of us stopped. I had already understood that this was a defect. In fact, he was addicted to that adrenaline rush. He was always betraying me, omitting things and not hiding things. He confessed other things and things like that. I felt so bad after I brought you here, so if he's not doing well, he started using this argument to move me. He knew I was going to seek help, and he stopped me from doing that. I looked at him and said, is that right? I'm not judging anyone, but is the trade work he brought close to me? The lovers he gave names to had rights, and when I was discovering that, I was surrounded by people who had contact with us and our family. It was very difficult for my children, who were suffering too. They are boys, and he thought they would be his partner, so he told them, look, that you. I was thinking about the last things he gave me, and I realized that I didn't really understand what he was trying to do. I'm not judging anyone, but I'm wondering if the trade work he brought was right for me. When I realized that, I was with people who were involved with us. It was really hard for my kids, who were suffering too. They're boys, and he thought they would be his partner. He told me, you're giving me a look. He shared this with the children. My children know about this internal war I was living. They sat with me and said, Mother, is happening this, and they started to signal things. It was very obvious, very clear, right? There was a car sticker. Then I remembered that he needed to get the car sticker because it was staying marked. Sometimes he was at a lover's house who was very close to work, and if someone saw that, they looked at me with concern. This person, he shared it with the children. My children know about this internal war I was living. They sat with me and said, Mother, is happening this, and started to signal things very obviously and clearly. Right away I remembered that he was quiet. He needed to get the car sticker because it was staying marked. Sometimes he was at a lover's house who was very close to work, and if someone saw the car, they would recognize it because of the store sticker. So it was like this. But why do you want to take the sticker? I said, look, it's not bad. The sticker okay. Normal is not off, and I said several excuses and things. I really was focused on my child. I don't see things, but I didn't understand that it was what I should focus on, not what I believed. The car would recognize because of the store sticker, so it was like this. People might wonder why I'd want to take the sticker, but the adhesion was bad. I said, look, it's not bad. The sticker is okay. Normal is not off. I said several excuses and several things, and I passed. I really was focused on my child. I didn't see things, but I didn't understand that I should focus on what I believed, not what I thought I should believe. Over the next 20 years, the process of separation was very difficult because they didn't believe that I would really have the courage to separate. They thought it was just another morning of me trying to have it all. Right? I tried to be firm, but I started going through a period of great violence. This included psychological violence, verbal violence, financial violence, and patrimonial violence. We didn't get to the point of physical violence in the final stretch. I know how hard it can be to separate when you're in an abusive relationship. I had to deal with a lot of emotional and psychological abuse for 20 years. I had to learn to recognize the signs of abuse and how to protect myself. I had to find a way out of the situation. I had to be strong and resilient. I had to find people who could support me and help me break free from the abuse. I had to be careful and cautious because the abuser might try to expose me. I had to be careful about who I trusted. I had 2 friends who were there for me when I was in the abusive relationship. They helped me through the process of getting out of the relationship. I had already shared some thoughts on 2 previous bulletins, and I gave a talk about it a lot. The La Maria does not prevent anyone from doing anything but the narcissist. He has a very fear of exposure. When I started to pierce the bubble, I had 2 friends who were fundamentalists. They accompanied me through my marriage from the beginning. They were the ones who told me about the behavior I shared. If you think you're crazy, look at this video. Look at this testimony. People spoke, so they brought me memories of things that had happened back there. You remember that time we were in such a place and he spoke? It's not true. What is being reported here is very similar. These people often needed to hold my shoulder and look deep into my eyes. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share my journey with you. I know it's been a difficult time, and I want to reassure you that I'm doing well. I've been working on understanding my own journey, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy, and I'm grateful for that. I've learned so much from my experiences, and I'm committed to making a positive impact on the world. I'm still dealing with some emotional trauma, but I'm working on it. I'm also in the judicial process right now, and I'm doing my best to protect myself. I'm grateful for the support I've received, and I'm taking this time to reflect and grow. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm not crazy. I'm just trying to be positive and support others. I've had some struggles, but I'm working through them. I'm not going to go near anyone who doesn't want me to. I'm not going to cause any trouble. I'm just trying to protect myself. When I look at a situation, I don't see a way out. I'm choosing to stay away from this conflict. I'm choosing to be silent because I'd rather not fight. I don't want to go through this again. Time can be cruel, but I'm grateful for life and all the good things in it. Your house because his house, right? I won't go near anyone. I won't bother anyone. I escape. Maybe it's a form of protection. I protect myself. When I look at a situation, there is no way to go home. I protect myself. I'm silent today because I'd rather win this war than risk fighting to fight. I'd rather not exist again and let time pass. Time is cruel, but thank God there is life and a lot of life outside of it. We can get out. There is life even if we don't see it. At that moment it's night but day. He comes, and he can come totally illuminated by a wonderful sun. Life after a toxic relationship. People carry many traumas, but there is a cure too. It's a decision that we need to make. Advice is weird no matter what. People will say, "Ah, Fulana. That weird so-and-so disappeared. Fulan moved away. So-and-so, we don't need care." Care? There's always life, even when it's hard to see. It's like night and day. He comes and he's all lit up by a beautiful sun. Life goes on after a toxic relationship. People carry many traumas, but there's a cure for that too. It's a decision we need to make. People say things like, "Fulana is weird," or "so-and-so disappeared," or "so-and-so moved away." But we don't need care. We need to start with ourselves. If we're lucky enough to find someone who helps, that's great. If you need a more intensive treatment, allow yourself to be cared for and loved by the same person. It's worth turning the page. There are optimal books for. Then I had the opportunity to meet another person who introduced me to the true meaning of love. I'm not talking about the love of a soap opera. I'm talking about care and zeal. I remember. It all starts with us, and if we're lucky, we find someone who can help. If you need a more intensive treatment, allow yourself to be cared for and loved by the same person. It's worth turning the page. There are optimal books for. Then I had the opportunity to meet another person who introduced me to the love of soap operas. I'm talking about the love of soap operas, the love of care and zeal. I remember that we lived in a situation. It's very funny because we were doing purchases there and I went to get something else. I forgot we already had something in the cart. We were in the Power Pass box and I distracted myself. I allowed myself to distract myself today. In the past, I couldn't distract myself. Nothing could breathe because any minimum failure was a war. So I allowed myself to distract myself by looking at knees and the person close to me, and he said that. That was the R of our relation. We were in a situation and it was very funny. We were buying things and I went to get something else. I forgot that we already had something else. We were in the cart at the Power Pass box and I distracted myself. Today I allow myself to distract myself. In the past I couldn't distract myself. Nothing could breathe because any little failure was a war. So I allowed myself to distract myself by looking at my knees and the person close to me. He said, I already passed the shopping. The card is with you and I'm here, my God. I really have a line. I got it. I came running and I remember that I was changed. We spent things there and I paid right on the card. We paid okay and I went to the car like that, terrified. I remember that we got in the car. I changed. I said, you won't say anything. F said what? You won't fight. You don't go fight. Why? I'm so glad we're on the same page. The card is with you and I'm here with you, my God. I'm so grateful that I got it. I came running and I remember that we spent the day there. I paid right on the card right with me. We paid okay and I went to the car terrified. I remember that we got in the car. I changed. I said, you won't say anything. You won't fight. You don't go fight. Why? We talked about it. I did you. Hope had a cue. The dog was with me and he was not so happening. This could have happened to me and I treated it in such a way. Very natural. Light did not have revenge. No rematch. I started crying. I said, how so you won't fight with me? I realized how much hurt I was right, and it was liberating. It has been a liberator, a blessing from God. I don't even have luck. I'm so grateful that I have this. I'm so glad we could talk about this. I hope you're well and that your day is going well. I'm so happy to hear that your dog was with you and that you were able to handle the situation so calmly. I'm so glad you're not feeling any revenge or rematch. I started crying because I realized how much I had hurt you and I realized that it was so liberating. I feel like I'm truly blessed by God. I don't even feel like I'm lucky. I feel like I'm just being treated with respect. I'm so glad you liked this story. Please subscribe to the channel so you can see all the new content we post every Thursday. And don't forget to activate notifications. If you're going through a divorce or in a relationship that's not working out, please come to our community. I created an exclusive women's group to help women go through the process without so much suffering or trauma. I'll leave more information in our description.